Poof. There he is.
Poof, here I am.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, good. How are you, Henri?
Mr. Todd H. Gardner, I'm doing well. Like I said earlier, I'm just having a great day. Like I'm loving it. Maybe it's your energy, but I'm having a great day and I cannot complain. How about yourself?
I'm having a pretty good day, other than my dog's barking in the background. Things things are pretty good. Lot going on in life.
Yep,
Working on lots of different things to make the web better, make the web faster, and
absolutely.
excited to kind of get out of my bubble today and talk to other performance professionals like yourself.
I'm glad that you could join us, make some time and hang out. It's funny you should say about the dog barking because before a stream, like I like to keep my window open and actually sleep with my window open. But I guess I don't know what's going on. They're mowing the lawn, and all I could just hear was a gas mower. And at one point, I could smell the gas mower, and decided to shut the window because I didn't want to just pass out. Totally crazy. But yeah, man, I'm super excited that you could join us. And as I mentioned before in the streams, and I mentioned maybe in our conversation, I like to start the show like this. I literally hand over the keys and the steering wheel and let you sort of like navigate. You're the co-pilot, or I'm the co-pilot, literally. But let's start like this. Introduce yourself and what you do.
All right, great. So I am, I guess, what you would call a micro entrepreneur. I've been a web developer for a very long time, 30-ish years. Um, been building, stuff. But about 15 years ago, I started building my first product, my first thing that was like, you know what, I didn't want to, work for somebody else anymore. I wanted to build my own thing. And that product was Track JS, which is a JavaScript error monitoring service.
Mhm.
And we launched it like a really great time. Everybody was like building big JavaScript apps. The web was really like there was JavaScript before, obviously, but this was the era when like JavaScript did everything. And obviously, JavaScript sucks a lot of the times, and it would break in unpredictable ways. And we have a really great service to like monitor that. So I've been, operating that for many years with my team. But we've branched out and built other products. We have 4 products actually right now that we build and manage with just our small team. Um, as far as like performance, like I've been doing performance related things for as long as I've been a developer, right? As long as I've been an engineer. Because things are slow. You build something and then you realize like, oh, here's all the ways I built it wrong, or all the things that are like bad or slow or getting in the way of people having a good experience. And so I actually really love this connection between that you've drawn between like performance and then like auto racing kind of thing, because I think there's some like interesting metaphors to use there. Like in software engineer, or like to make your car go faster, you can either give it more power or reduce its weight. And I think that like you can have that similar correlation in software generally, where it's like I can make this software go faster by running it on bigger hardware, giving it more stuff, or find a way to do less. And then if we take that to like the web specifically, generally we don't have control of what our stuff runs on. It runs on a device that we don't control. So the only way to make our stuff go faster is to do less, which is like kind of just in the web to increase performance, you do fewer things. There's nothing else to do. Find a way to do fewer things, fewer requests, fewer bytes, fewer lines of code, fewer compute cycles. It's the only way to make anything go faster.
I like that. Even though I've sort of made the connection, but I do like how you've added a bit of depth there, sending or giving it more gas, like going from like a 4.7 liter engine to like a 6.3. How about we make more efficient engines that run faster on less fuel? How about we add a turbo boost, which could be an API that's brand new, right? And we get that little zing of power and speed when we need it. This is actually wild. I really like that. Like the design of the automobile or the race car, making physical changes so that you can run faster. That could be the parallel to a site that is built differently, more efficiently, like you said, less requests to get as much, if not more, done.
So design can solve so many performance problems.
Absolutely.
We're putting together like a new site for one of our new products, and it's very basic right now. And we're kind of taking like this aesthetic, like derived from like RFC standards. And so it's just very like plain text, like trying to just kind of be a little snarky about like an RFC that we don't agree with, but like we need to deal with kind of thing. And in that style. And so it's like the site is so fast because like I'm delivering text and a font on a blank page.
Yes.
And there's like no JavaScript on it, no meaningful amount of JavaScript on it yet. And so like it's just scoring perfect in everything. And it's like, well, the design informs it, right? Like if you start your design with like a very graphic, interactive thesis on what you want to do, well, you're going to be fighting performance uphill the whole way because that's just the design you chose is inherent. Like you chose to race in a school bus. Like you're going to struggle a lot with putting a big enough engine and like figuring out the tires and transmit like how to make that school bus fast. Where if you just start with a Porsche,
Yes.
like I mean, it's going to be easier to go fast.
Absolutely. Porsche.ca, of course. I've made the parallels with running in the past in a few presentations, but I definitely love the actual race car parallel. And I'm going to have to sit down and really dig deep and make that part of my intro now. So thank you very much. Hopefully there's no marca registrada on that little blurb right there.
No, it's all yours.
Oh, awesome. Let's get into another, and I know you just touched on it very quickly, but I like to ask my guests this each and every time. What was their earliest memory of when they decided to get into performance and stick with it?
Hmm. When to stick with it.
Yeah. I mean, we all sort of have these moments where like, oh, performance is kind of cool. I think of Tammy when she had mentioned that it was someone she ended up working for who was like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. I think you might be able to provide this for us. Someone who wanted like storytelling around performance. I remember Tim Verreek talked about the fact that he had his little ScaleMate site or a site, and one day it got reviewed in a magazine, I think a national computer magazine or something like that, and they mentioned specifically how fast the site was, and he was like, hey, this is actually kind of interesting. So in your case, do you have a memory, it could be a book you read, a blog post, or a moment where you're like, you know what, I think I wouldn't mind
Yeah.
spending some time working in this space?
So I do have a story. It might come up a little disappointing next to some of these giants that you've talked about. So in 2000, the world was kind of going into pandemic mode, and Track JS, our first product, was doing great. It was very healthy, but like there wasn't a clear next thing to do. Like we didn't know what the next feature to build is, what the next capability we should add. There wasn't a clear path to move forward. But we had a lot of people who would ask us about tracking performance alongside errors. Is that like their site wouldn't necessarily break? There wasn't an exception. There wasn't anything like wrong, but it was slow. And they wanted ways to track that. But it really didn't fit with what our product did. And the customers that would ask for it tended to be a little different. Like they weren't our core group. But it was a really interesting kind of problem to solve. And frankly, we were kind of bored.
Okay.
We're like, we need a new challenge. We need to have a new thing to think about. And we'd kind of like done a little bit of like market research about like who's out there, who's working on performance, who's doing this sort of thing. And we found a bunch of like really big, really mature tools, but we didn't find a whole lot that like targeted small to medium businesses like us. We didn't really find a whole lot of people other than like, hey, just use, script Lighthouse yourself or gather the data yourself. And so we like building tools for ourselves, and so that's where we started is like, I'm going to start tracking the performance on Track JS so that we can try and make our product faster. And if we think it's cool enough, we might turn this into something that we can sell. We might try and make this into a thing that we'll give it to other people and let other people use it in the same kind of philosophy. And that idea is what RequestMetrics came from, which is on its like third kind of iteration as a product idea. We've had a couple of different related runs at performance that kind of came from it. But that was like that impetus. I don't have this grand story to tell you like, oh, I was inspired by this blog post or this person. Like, honestly, I was looking for another new project and it seemed hard. And I like a challenge.
Nice, nice, amazing. Well, again, sort of like these gifts can come in so many different forms. These inspirations, these opportunities. Like the one that we talked about prior to jumping on the stream, which we'll be able to discuss at a different time in a different place. Let's start to talk about in a bit of a kind of chronological order the products that you have. So let's kind of go back and talk about Track JS.
Sure.
Origin story, and we'll go after that.
Sure. All right. So let me paint you a picture. The year is 2012.
Wow.
The year is 2012, and in 2012, I was an engineer. I was a consultant, and I would go and work for a company. And this is the era where the JavaScript frameworks that were coming into existence was Backbone JS was actually the biggest thing kind of happening at the time. Some people started to talk about this thing called Knockout, which Microsoft was really pushing. Angular was just kind of an idea at this point, but nobody really took it super seriously yet. React wasn't even a thing. Mm-hmm. Most sites, if they use JavaScript, was heavily jQuery. And I was like a bit of a fanboy that I knew somebody who was involved in the jQuery UI project. And it was just like, that was the time that these things started. And I was pretty good at JavaScript. And so I was getting hired by a lot of companies that wanted to build ambitious JavaScript apps, ambitious client-side experiences that could rival Gmail, but for whatever domain that they were in. And we would build these first a Backbone app and launch it. And they were really cool. But just like all software, it breaks. It breaks in unpredictable ways. You throw it out into a browser, and the browser environment at this point is like, we still have to support IE8 a lot of times. Like, it wasn't like everything is just running on Blink. Everything is running on Chromium anyway, and so it doesn't matter. No, like the browsers were all very, very different. And so things would break all the time. And there was like no universally accepted way of knowing that. Like, when something would break on a server, there's tons of logging tools. Everybody had logging frameworks to know when they happened. And when something blows up on your server, it's really like every single error on a service you control is important. Every single one is a bug that I made. But when something blows up in JavaScript land, 90% of them are garbage. It's a browser you don't support. Somebody hit your site from a Game Boy or a Samsung refrigerator or something, or it's just a bot. And so having a tool that could capture those errors and then decipher which ones were important was really a unique idea. And so I actually built a service like that for a client, like as part of a consulting arrangement. Like, I built a monitoring tool. We got that into their project plan, and it was part of the service. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is super. And I went on to another consulting client and built another app and another little monitoring tool. because I thought it was important. And after this idea had kind of been beaten into my head a few times, like, oh, everybody's going to need this. I should write this and then like sell it to all of my clients. Because that's where my head was at, was that I was still going to be a consultant. I wasn't going to do anything else. But the idea kind of took off. Like I started, I got together a small team. We, got a basic product put together. We took it out to some user groups and people wanted to buy it right then and there. We got to like the front page of Hacker News. Like it was awesome. And we started just growing this product and building it up. And there's a lot to do. And we were a small team. We didn't want to take outside investment. We just wanted to like build this thing. And so we worked on that for a lot of years, like that exclusively. And we learned about how to build a product, how to talk to engineers, how to like actually talk commercially to engineers in a not scummy way, which is really hard. It's really hard to like kind of, I'm here with the intent of being commercial, but like, I'm not going to be like douchey about it.
Right. Right.
It's a very fine line you have to walk. And honestly, still not always good at it. But I am an engineer, like by trade, like, so, I had some credibility I could bring into it. So then we built a second product along the way. We had a particular customer for Track JS that they were building these JavaScript apps that go on set-top boxes that like go into a hotel. So like you'd hit a button to like watch Netflix or whatever in your hotel room, and it would actually switch to like this web app that would let you log in and like stream services and stuff like that. But it was buggy. Like there's no good way to debug it. They needed to like understand things in real time. And so the second app that we built was called Remote.js, which was this thing that we basically took the idea of, hey, let's do all the same things we do for Track JS production monitoring, but make it for real-time debugging, where we like connect all of the telemetry that we're pulling out of like a user's browser and stream it real time into another person's browser so that they can see what's happening, and then take commands from that first browser and feed them back. So you can like ask questions about what's the state of the app right now. You could take a screenshot. You could like see a video of like what they're doing, that sort of stuff. And it was awesome. It's still live today at remotejs.com. We never monetized it. We never turned it into anything because there's some security implications around it. It's basically a remote script injection as a service.
Okay.
That's basically it's exactly what you don't want to do. You don't want to let arbitrary people execute commands in your users' browsers. And Remote.js is a tool to let arbitrary third people execute commands in other people's browsers.
Right.
So there's all kinds of disclaimers around it about like, hey, this is what this is for. And we've had to shut people down who've used it like inappropriately. But it's still a really valuable debugging tool. So then the third product we built was starting in 2000. We started working on what would become RequestMetrics, which went through a couple of phases. First, as an internal tool that we didn't name or do anything with. The first time we revealed it, it was called RequestMetrics, but like it had a different logo. We didn't really use the sloth thing that like we started using later. And the idea was we want to be as cheap as possible. Like the thesis was people aren't willing to pay anything for web performance. Like other tools are free. How can we be just more than free? And so the whole idea was like, what can I do for $10 a month? And so we built this thing that everything was aggregated. You couldn't like, all the data was like rolled to like a minute or a 10-minute period. So you couldn't really see like the idea of having the P90, you couldn't even do it. Like it was all about like what the average performance was for this minute kind of thing. And so that obviously didn't work. It didn't work for a lot of reasons. It didn't work because people who were really into performance needed that nitty gritty details. And people who weren't really into performance weren't willing to pay any money kind of regardless. It doesn't matter if it was $1, $10 or $1,000. A dollar was too much money.
Right.
So we scrapped that idea and we re-envisioned the product the second time and kind of broadened our scope. Like it was, we had a bit of an overreaction to the simpleness of it. Because like, so that first iteration of RequestMetrics failed. It was not a good idea. The second iteration of RequestMetrics also failed, but it failed because there wasn't one clear customer. There was like 4 clear customers, and we could never really decide which one was the most important. We kind of chased this idea of client-side observability, and we were one of the first people at that. Like, there's a handful of customers today that are, or not customers, other companies that are running at that idea today with varying degrees of success. Like Honeycomb and Grafana are both trying to make that a thing. But our theory around it was that there's all these ways we monitor the web. We do error monitoring. You do performance monitoring. I would argue that analytics, web analytics and product analytics are parts of monitoring. And security, like understanding what scripts are executing on your domain and whether or not you've authorized them to be there, is another important kind of monitoring. But all of those things are different tools run by different people today. And it's the same underlying data. And so we built this idea of, we're going to do all of those things. We built an agent that did it. And there's some parts of that exist today, even in the current version of the RequestMetrics product, but where the idea of, not only do I have like, here's the performance, but here's the performance and how performance changes when these errors happen, or how performance changes for converting versus non-converting users, or how performance happens if this third-party script happens to be on the page. And linking those ideas together, we thought was like this really novel thing. The problem, or why that idea kind of failed, is that in order to get you on board with that, I needed to sell the analytics person, I needed to sell the web person, I needed to sell the ops person, I needed to sell the security person at a company. And they're very different people with very different ideas of what's good. And rarely do they share the same budget. And so that idea, even though I still think it's a great idea, and I think it's where the web is going to go, I think we were ahead of our time. And so we closed that idea down, and we pulled back into a web performance product, which is the current version of RequestMetrics. And what it does today is where we married together the idea that like real user monitoring, which you talked about on a previous show, and we're actually part of that community board. RUM is super important because it's the truth. It is what the real people visiting your site are actually experiencing. But there's also a ton of noise in that. Like, some of those real users you don't give a crap about because they're not anybody who are your real users. Like, if you get a surge of traffic from Mongolia, but like your users aren't in Mongolia, then you don't care. I'm not going to sell anything to them. It's not important to me. So figuring out what the signal versus the noise is in that real user data is super important. But that's frankly just a hard problem. It's a hard problem for people to think about. It's a hard problem to solve. A lot of people just don't care enough for that. And so on the other side, there's synthetic monitoring or lab testing or whatever you want to call it. Like running page speed insights, running Lighthouse, running whatever, which is easy and fast and cheap. And like, you can just do it and I can get a 100 score and it's gamified and I feel good and like, it's great. And that's what 95% of people who think about web performance just do that. And so what we tried to do with the current iteration of RequestMetrics is marry the two together in kind of like almost a maturity model. Like, you always start with lab testing. You always start with like, tell me what my site is right now. Give me a cool gamified visual experience that says, here's how fast it is. Here's what I think is wrong with your site. Here's how to make it better, blah, blah, blah. And then if you keep going, if you dig in, eventually you hit the edge of what you can do with lab testing, and you need real user monitoring. And then we try and bring you over into that world and say, great, I can tell you all of those things. You just have to add the script to your page so I can start gathering analytics from your real users. And taking people on that journey, that maturity level of saying, you're not ready for RUM yet. That's okay. Tool's valuable without RUM. You can just use lab testing all day and it's great. And as soon as you hit that maturity level of like, I want to know how fast my site is all the time and not just from your server, but from the boss's phone, like we can do that. We can take you on that journey. And that has been like a much more successful approach than any of our previous iterations have been.
Awesome.
Well, then there's a fourth product that we're just starting on now that you alluded to. It is not in this perf space at all. It's called CertKit. We're doing some certificate automation work. Again, it's starting on a very similar path to what we did with RequestMetrics, where we're solving our own problem first and trying to decide, is there a product here? We're honestly, we don't know yet. Maybe.
Right, right, right. And again, I think we'll have an opportunity to talk about that. But I certainly want to sort of like double back and sort of like comment or chit chat about some of what you said there. The idea that you might get a surge of traffic from Mongolia, as an example, has always been very fascinating to me because sometimes it's just like a reason. Something's happening, and I don't know, someone who has a super popular blog and it picks up in this bizarre chat room in Mongolia. And next thing you know, they get hit with like all this traffic. Yes, you're not going to sell anything to Mongolia, but it's just another data point to keep in mind. Who knows
Totally.
what has been happening. And I'll bring up a quick example. I gave a talk once, and it was back in the days of, well, I shouldn't say back in the days, but it was an important topic where I just reminded folks that you could get traffic, you could get unexpected traffic, and it will provide some insights on what you should do potentially in the future. And a woman had come to talk to me afterwards and said that out of nowhere, this education platform that they had sort of built out and put up for a North American, if not just American audience, was getting flooded by students online in India. And they were getting all these messages about some of the issues they were having because they couldn't load the pages. And they were completely dumbfounded. They're like, how did they find our site? And we're suddenly being, overwhelmed with all these messages about poor performance. And that's when they realized some of the issues that they were having. But she told me specifically, she was like, I was just blown away. I had no idea that this is what was happening with our site. And her lab data, her lab metrics were like, hey, everything's fine, and suddenly the real users are coming around knocking on their door and sometimes beating down their door, saying that I can't even load this, I don't know, this image with all the information that I need about like whatever. So that always sat with me, and trying to understand or get people to understand the whole rum data. You also mentioned that earlier on you get I don't know, you might get like a Game Boy showing up on your analytics and stuff like that. I think a lot of
True
people.
story. That happened. That happened to one of our customers once.
Well, absolutely, and I was just going to support that because I don't think people realize the amount of devices that are web and internet enabled today. And some people are accessing the web with what is not a primary web device. It could be a Game Boy, it could be X, Y, and Z, but they're like, okay, you know what, let me just check something while I'm on this device right now. And these things happen, and if you get enough of it happening, you're like, okay, what's going on here?
I think that's what's really important to keep in mind as like as an owner of a website or as a manager of a website, is that like both with like the India example that you gave earlier and this, is that like there's your core traffic of who did I build this site for, and then there's like serendipitous traffic, like the fact that a whole bunch of people in India showed up for this lesson course is probably great. It improved it, and so they are your customer, just an unexpected customer or a serendipitous customer, in which case you should expand your site to work for them. They taught you things, and you could probably get a whole bunch more Indian customers if you optimize your site to be better for them. But then there's like there's garbage out there, and it could be like they're making fun of you. The name of your product is like a weird dirty joke in their language or something like that. To which like, and that happens. It happens all the time. And so you just need to make that choice of like, oh, I'm seeing this surge in traffic from this place I did not expect. Do I care?
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
is this something that's important to me? Because that needs to be the decision before you spend engineering time on it.
Hmm.
Like, our time isn't free, our effort isn't free. Adding complications to our system is never free. You pay for it down the line. And so if you see that, like, oh, I got all this traffic from Mongolia and they're having a bad time, let me optimize for it, you skipped an important step. Is like, one, do I care? Like, is this site for them? Did I build this for them? Can they benefit from it? Can I benefit from it? Is there a reason to invest engineering time in this? Because if it's yes, great, let's do it. But like sometimes it's no.
Yep.
And the sites should just be slow for them because that's not what this is for.
Yep, absolutely. You understand and you know who your core customer is, and if there's something eventually that develops in other territories that makes sense, yes, maybe you are going to boom budget in some engineering time for
Yeah.
for it to be tweaked so that they can also use
And the
it.
same thing with the Game Boy traffic, right? Like if all of a sudden, if it's just a one-off and it generates a bunch of errors because like it's a different JavaScript interpreter running, well, you decide, is that important to me? Like, did I just discover this like market for my stuff or for my product or for my content or whatever it is I'm doing on Game Boy? In which case I need to like, let's figure that out. How do we test it? How do we make sure this is great?
Yeah,
Or is it just some one-off weird thing that's like,
yeah,
all right.
absolutely agreed. And I think the key is to know about it. Like no one likes surprises, and having the knowledge that's like, hey, 1.7% of our traffic is coming in from Game Boys. Okay, cool, noted. But we're still going with our core audience of like 72%, whatever. So
Yeah.
but let's we talked about earlier request metrics. Let's pull up yes, it is. All right. So we are looking at request metric in its most current form. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is the service right now. This is real data from the service right now.
Amazing.
And so what we're actually looking at real data from the Track JS website
Mhm.
in RequestMetrics. So I'm kind of merging together all the things.
Right.
Now we obviously use all the different sides of RequestMetrics, but like depending on which customer we're dealing with, they may or may not have all this information. The UI is a little dynamic in terms of it shows you the things that you're using. And so lab testing is kind of where it starts. Like once you switch over to real, we kind of demote it as like a little bit less important, but that's where everybody kind of starts. And so we can look at all the lab tests that have been run. Basically, we use real user monitoring to inform lab testing. Is we discover the pages on your site that are the busiest, and then we automatically run lab tests for them every day, based on like these are the pages that we think matter being that they have the most traffic, and then we test them. And we run it through a modified version of the Lighthouse scanner. And then we roll up like, here's what your average score is. Here's like where your request lined. Here's common issues that happen across every single one of your pages. This would just be like the recommendations that come out of Lighthouse or whatever. But we roll them all together and say like, listen, 100% of your sites say we should serve our static assets with a more efficient cache policy. This is like all of our lab tests come back with that recommendation kind of thing. But they're only the improved. They're not critical ones. So like there's no widespread critical issues here. But clearly it's not affecting everything because we're still getting 100 on average for stuff. But we could dig in on one of these and say, so here's a mobile test that got ran. This one ran 4 hours ago. Here's all the FCP, LCP, like all the metrics that come out of Lighthouse. And then we'll roll up with it the real user monitoring scores. So for this same page, the TTFB from real users is 3.9 or 399 milliseconds. The FCP is 1.12, which is slightly slower than what this lab test did. And we think this is important to keep calling out and educating people. Like performance engineers that might be listening would be like, Well, obviously, like I'm looking at a different thing. Why are you mashing this data up together? And I'm mashing it up together because a lot of people don't understand why it's different. And they don't understand why it's different. And they click these little buttons of like, where we try and describe why it's different, why your lab test data isn't your authoritative data that you should like care about, kind of thing. We do like all these little fun things with like a film strip. If we were to like rerun this test, we could like, you know, I'm not sure if the visuals will show up, but like we do a little video, kind of just trying to like capture people's imagination. Like, oh, this is a cool thing. I can click in here. I can see what's actually happening and I can interact with it in interesting ways. We pull out insights about what it's doing and show you a full waterfall of like, here's how things were requested along the way and what the page looked like at the time. Highlight the resources that are the biggest, blocking, transfer time, stuff like that. So you can really try and understand, at least for this lab test, what was slow. And what this can really help you do is once you've kind of the workflow that we like, that we think is the best, is if you've really invested into both sides of the product, and you decide you want to look into something, like let's say I want to take a look at LCP. I could look for, you know, what are things that have slow LCP scores? So here's like this weird one-off. And this is only like, I have a single data point. So it's not like the best example, but this site really isn't very slow. So here's a blog about Angular error handling that this one user had a 6.36 second LCP. And so like, that's not good. You could then use this as a jumping off point to look into something, because the limitation of real user monitoring is I don't have a whole lot of like very precise details. Like the browser hides a lot of that stuff from me for security reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But when I know that, now I can run a lab test on this page like we've already done. And the lab test can tell me a bunch of stuff that I couldn't get from real user data. I can like actually see like, here's exactly how big this image is, even if it's hosted from a third party. I could see like what format was that the things come down in, what JavaScript ran too long, all kinds of information that might not be available to me on the real user monitoring side. And so we think it's interesting that we're like smashing these two kind of concepts together. We even like, if we take a look at a lab report for like the top level page, if the page is big enough that it shows up in Crux in Google's data, we'll show you that inline as well. And so here's a report from like the homepage of Track JS that says not only how did it score for this lab test, here's how fast users perceive this page, and here's how fast Google thinks this page is. All kind of in one view that like lets the user kind of mature in what they care about over time. If all they are interested in lab testing, they can still log in, they can look at lab tests all day long, and we encourage them that they should do RUM, but like they don't have to. And then we just break down all kinds of different aspects based on what metrics they're after. And we're still actively working on this and adding to it. We actually just launched this report here, this connection report, where we look at the performance of your site based on what the reported connection speed is. And so it's pretty interesting. Like there's a pretty direct correlation of like how fast something is. Fast broadband, the load tends to be 3.14 seconds, but high latency connections tend to have 5-second connections. And you can see how many there are. So if you need to optimize your site because, hey, there's a lot more slow cellular people visiting your site than you think, you can see that. You can focus on that. And then there's a little bit of like the last iteration of RequestMetrics that's in here as well, because we still think it's valuable. And like, honestly, we'd already built it, so it's there. So like we do a bunch of API monitoring. We track all the APIs that you call, what the status code of them is, what the performance of each one is. So for example, when we make calls to post capture on Track JS, it's been called 26 times. It's all been a 200 okay. The performance of it was 450 milliseconds. And we could break that down by a country that it came from and stuff like that. There's some of the analytics product left in here as well. We can see like where traffic came from, the traffic source, where people are landing, where people are leaving, event tracking, error tracking, a bunch of other stuff that's honestly was just, we'd already built it. It doesn't cost us anything to keep running it. So it's still in the system. But the focus of the tool at this point is very much on on web performance and kind of marrying together that lab data, real user data, and Google data together.
Amazing. You know, and I love how it's all being sort of surfaced together. You know, I'll give you a quick example, and I mean, example, something that I've talked about a few times, because you certainly mentioned sort of like education, you know, getting people to understand how this data works, how it works together, and what to take from it. You know, I've talked about how, you know, not trying to be macabre, but how sometimes performance auditing or checking out the data can feel like a crime scene. You have a bit of an issue. One side of the room, there's a knife that looks like it may have some blood stains. All right. But on the far side is the wall with the blood stains. The knife and the wall could be connected, but we're actually not sure yet.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to dig around, and hopefully you come up with more data and some other um, details are out and about within the room, and you have to sort of like reconstruct what potentially happened. And I find performance is along the same way. It's like you have one set of data, you're like, okay, I have all this lab data, cool, but suddenly you have some rum data to add to the narrative of what could be taking place. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, cool. Oh, wait, there's crux data now. All right. So now you start to, you know, make this sort of like bigger scene, and you rebuild it. Potentially then, like you said, you have API performance data. More of that information comes, you start to make more educated, less guessing, but more educated guesses ultimately, you know. And I've loved that part about it, being able to say like, okay, this is not really that important. We have to focus on these four details right here.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings up hopefully the solution that we need out of it. So but yeah, that's pretty awesome right there.
Yeah, so like one of the things that is interesting is when you decide you want to learn something, like the big problem with real data, like I
Mhm,
mentioned earlier, is noise. Is that like
mhm,
this is say like the P75, the 75th percentile of these metrics for all of the users. But I might not care about all of the users. I might care about a subset. And so we give you a lot of filtering technology to like get into that. So like I could say look at client devices and say, you know what? My audience for this are typically people on a corporate network, like looking for tools. I'm a B2B service largely. So I'm going to say, I'm going to look at people with fast broadband connections and people like overwhelmingly my customers use Chrome. And let's say I'm worried about the United States right now. So now I can zoom in and say like, okay, given that, here's the performance. And still good. Everything is good. But maybe I've heard that like somebody is having a bad time and I want to understand why. So now I could filter down and say, you know what? I want to see, show me the people who have a bad first contentful paint. And so now I could dig in and be like, okay, when people have a bad first contentful paint, they also had a bad TTFB. And they probably also had a bad LCP. They kind of all
mhm.
three of those go together, which I think we would expect. And then we could dig into that and understand, given these things of like they are our target customers. They should have a good experience based on their technology, but for whatever reason they didn't. Let's try to understand why. And now we can dig in like, well, there's two particular pages where this happened. Let's look at the one where we have more data for. So here's a per thing. We've already figured out like Track or RequestMetrics kind of figured out, hey, this is a page you might want information for. So I've already run a lab report. And here's the general things that it found. Now the lab report probably is good. If we go to the lab report, yeah, it says it's 100. But these were the things that it thought if you needed to make it better, you could. Now, but these real users, which look like they both came in from a Google ad campaign, um, they had a bad experience. And so if I just want to focus on that side, I can dig in on the real user side where I show like, hey, this is a fast user. they should have had a good experience, but for whatever reason, it was served over HTTP2 is only an 8K page. For whatever reason, the LCP was slow. And we could dig into, this is the real user data on this side. So I could look at, how much time was spent on blocking assets versus how much time was spent on the client side. There's a lot of time spent on that client time, a lot of time spent on blocking assets. And so then we can dig in, like, these are the assets that we're running and which ones we think might be slow. There was a long animation frame during this period, kind of blocking while all these scripts were loading, which would, kind of indicate that one of these scripts was probably involved in this long animation frame. Because it was all kind of queuing up here. Oh, there was a second one that queued up right before the largest contentful paint and the largest layout shift. So we get a ton of clues, even from the real user monitoring side, about what's causing slowdowns.
Getting back to the education part, I think is crucial. We just went through a waterfall. I've often said that waterfalls aren't well understood. Like, I think a lot of people get a sense of what's going on, but being able to dive into the details, I think, is absolutely crucial. And I think a waterfall, if anything, could give you, or can at least surface a lot of the challenges right away, but you have to know how to really interpret that information on the page. Something that I wanted to ask.
Just let me jump in on the waterfall.
Yeah, please.
Because I totally agree with that. Like, I've had so many people ask me to explain waterfalls to them. I have a video actually out on my YouTube channel where I talk about waterfalls and flame charts and stuff like that and kind of break them down, which was a bunch of content that I kind of extracted out. So I'm an author on front-end masters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did the web performance fundamentals course out there that talks about all that sort of stuff. And I took a bunch of like snippets out of that and made like little YouTube shorts.
Nice.
So I'll drop a link to that.
Yeah. And we'll put that in the show notes without a doubt.
Because I totally agree. There's waterfall charts are not well understood, but they're super valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it really just gives you this snapshot. It's like, oh my God, there's an issue here. Like starting the car and you see blue smoke coming out the back. You're like, oh, this is clear. There's something going on. So we need to sort of investigate. Something I did want to ask you, and I know you've worked with a number of industries and a number of teams, from technical to non-technical teams, I believe. What has been your fave in terms of like, having clients? Like, would you rather have a technical client or one that you're really, that is not necessarily well versed in, the engineering side, but kind of understands what needs to be done?
Well, personally, my favorite kind of clients are people who I would say are definitely technical, but are approaching maybe like the end of their junior technical phase. Like, they understand some things, they're really curious, they're really engaged, but they know that they don't know everything yet. They haven't put bad habits in place. When the company gets too big or the people get too senior, they tend to be set in their ways, or they have like management, like there's things that get in the way that like of changing their behavior or changing progress or adopting new practices or whatever. And if they're too junior or too non-technical, there's a lot of education that has to happen about why this is important, kind of thing. And I don't know how successful they're ultimately going to be. Like when somebody kind of lands on RequestMetrics and they don't know what HTML is, like I really don't know how much I can help them, because at its core, RequestMetrics is a technical product built for engineers. And so I can try and make simpler discussions or simpler UI and simpler recommendations. And in a lot of cases we try and give as simple explanations as possible, but like, it's just not going to be like, it's inherently a technical problem. And so one of I think the big challenges in the web performance space overall is that there's a lot of non-technical people that still work on the web and have stores, use WordPress or Shopify or all of these other like easy tools to like make a living and like, build great things on the web, but they don't understand how any of the underpinnings work. And so then
Yes.
when they've built a site with Shopify, but then the Shopify report says, "Hey, the site is slow," they're kind of stuck. They don't understand how they got into that situation. Uh, and all we're doing is telling them, "Hey, you got to uninstall all that stuff you just installed to like make your site work because it's slow."
Yes.
And they're like, "But that's what I used to make the site work." Like,
Yeah.
you can't tell them they need to optimize their JavaScript and use more defers. Like, you know, that's not going
Absolutely.
to do anything.
Yeah.
So like, it's kind of back on us as engineers. Like, if we want to support that group and make being on the web a non-technical thing, we need to give them non-technical answers.
Yep.
And that's a really hard problem. And it's a hard enough problem that like I'm not even trying to do, like, I am an engineer building for other engineers. I'm not trying to build no code solutions.
Right.
But I think web performance is one of these places where the no code world and the engineering is required to fix this thing world smash together.
It's literally the conversation that I had with well, part of the conversation that I had with Tammy last week or the week before, or anyways, episode 7, because she talked about, being hired by a company that wanted to talk about performance in a way that was better understood, and not saying that it was not meant for engineers, but in a way that was a bit more, comestible in terms of like content, and that people potentially outside of the engineering world could really grasp, because she was not an engineer by trade, but she understood the challenges and of making a site a bit more performant, and the user experience that came along with it. Man, we're going to wrap up, but I definitely do want to ask you, what you see in terms of the next step over either at RequestMetric, or where you see performance going moving forward, or both.
Uh, so the next thing that I'm kind of thinking about, I actually don't have a solution for this, but it's a common problem that I saw, is that like over the last 2-3 years, we've seen a lot of interest in performance. I would say web performance has like a very trendy topic for a lot of people. And I think Google is responsible for a lot of that, with when they came out with Core Web Vitals and then like threatened that like, hey, this is going to be a ranking factor. I think a lot of people got interested in this. A lot of people started focusing on this. And I think a lot of people are making money on this. But what's not entirely clear is whether or not Google was telling the truth. Is that like there's not been a whole lot of data that actually indicates that the Core Web Vitals are ranking factors. In fact, there's been a bunch of studies that have like said the opposite, is that it's so much less important than content and backlinks, that you probably should have spent that time building more content and backlinks than doing anything else. And so I think there's a little bit of a pushback happening right now into like, how important is this? And not that it's not important from like we want to build a great user experience. I'm talking about is this important from should I hire an agency to optimize my site in a big web performance project? Because I think that's a lot of the people looking for things, is an agency driving a web performance project. And there's not a lot of great tools for them beyond just running a Lighthouse report periodically and trying to prove to your client, hey, you used to have a score of 50 and now you have a score of 90. And that's great. Except, we all kind of know that's a little bit bullshit because the score doesn't mean anything. But it's enough to appease the client. I'm concerned that client isn't going to care anymore if like there's not real consequences soon from like Google to like actually penalize that. And on the other side, how do we like get them to care about something more than their Lighthouse score?
Yes.
Which like doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had this conversation several times, and I feel that I don't say they're a victim, but Lighthouse is potentially a victim of its own success, because I think it was absolutely required to get Lighthouse in the ecosystem conceptually. It's like, hey, this is a more or less idea of how your site is performing. And, once we got that out there, or once that was out there, it didn't cling. It was just like bolted in. And now there's this next phase of trying to get people to understand Rum and Lighthouse and how they coexist and can work together. And getting that messaging out, I think, has been challenging. But that's why I'm here. That's why you're here, and a few others. That's why RequestMetrics is here as well. But yes, I do agree that there is a bit of a challenge, but I think that we can make that work without a doubt. Yeah, Todd, I want to thank you for your time. It's been an hour already, which I'm actually shocked, but it's been like super smooth and effortless. So I want to thank you for that. In sort of parting, do you have any sort of like words of wisdom that you want to share?
I always come down for web performance specifically. My favorite catchphrase is that you can't make anything faster. You can find ways to do fewer things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's certainly correct. And when people share things online, sometimes they're like, hey, look at my, Lighthouse score or whatever, and they'll have the actual link to the blog or the site. Sometimes I'll chime in. I'm like, dude, you have 12 requests. This is, by default, this is what should happen. So this is awesome. You've made an effort to have as few requests as possible, because quite often you don't need that many to have something presentable on a page. So that's great, and that's fantastic advice there. Someone's been watching. We've had a great crowd, by the way. And by the way, folks, I always keep forgetting that this is a bit of a forum, so Q&A was quite possible. I always forget to say that. So if you had questions, we could have answered them on the fly, but next time. Someone wants to get in touch with you. They've been watching this. They think this is awesome. What do they do?
Best way to get a hold of me is you can hit, I got a little contact form on my website, toddhgardner.com. You can always get in touch with me there. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Blue Sky, Todd H. Gardner, on both of those places. Generally, if you just Google my name, I tend to show up a lot of those places due to relationships with the projects that I've built. So it should be easy to get a hold of me. Feel free to.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to share all that information in the show notes, and we'll talk about some of the links that you want to send me as well, that I'll share in the show notes as well. That being said, I'm going to have this episode ready probably next couple of days, if not for sure by next week, because I like to launch the episodes on the same day as the next episode. I'll announce the next guest shortly. Give me a couple of days to make some confirmations. Todd, I want to thank you. I'm going to take you off stage so we can sort of like wrap up on our own in the green room. And I will bid everyone a adieu. And thank you very much.